play music for them that talks about life, love, heartbreak, drinking, dancing, and having a wonderful time. Each of these little things that come to mind whenever I think of my nation. For more than 4 decades, Alan Jackson deceived everyone. He grinned for the cameras as he stood on stage and sang passionately. However, he was concealing something terrible behind the scenes. In 2011, physicians informed him that he had been keeping the secret for 10 years. Supporters believed he was becoming older. They were unaware that he was battling for his life. It crushed hearts when he eventually told the truth in 2021. All around America. This is the true reason why Alan Jackson left the music industry forever. On October 17, 1958, Alan Jackson was born in the tiny hamlet of Georgia's Noonan, Ruth and Eugene. His working-class parents were attempting to maximize their resources. Ruth worked in cafeterias at schools and Daddy Gene worked at a Ford plant as a mechanic. They had very little, but they possessed high morals. Keep music close at hand, work hard, and maintain your humility. Their home was constructed around the ancient tool shed owned by Alan's family. If it large enough for a family of 7, noisy and claustrophobic, Alan he valued solitude because he had 4 elder sisters, Diane, Kathy, Carol, and Connie. Never truly understood. However, that tiny home was filled with love, warmth, and the aroma of Ruth's food. It wasn't easy growing up in that shed, but Alan discovered a music that makes you feel comfortable. He spent $50 on his first guitar when he was 16 years old. It was inexpensive guitar, but to him, it was everything. He worked on mastering chords every day and belting out songs by Gene Watson and Hank Williams. The following year, he made his stage debut in a high school production of Oklahoma when he was 17 years old. He was enraged by that time in the spotlight. Alan had been at work since the age of 12. He worked at a shoe repair shop for his first employment. Then he took any work he could locate, constructing furniture, selling automobiles, and working as a carpenter. He even contributed to the construction of homes. He left school, but not because he wanted to, but every job taught him that the family needed money, something he learned how to interact with people from selling cars. He learned carpentry. How to maintain concentration. Every dollar he made and every hour of work brought him a bit nearer to his ambition. Alan eventually started his first band. They made a call Dixie Steel, as they called themselves. They were not well-known. Stadiums weren't where they played. They performed in neighborhood gatherings, VFW halls, and pubs throughout Georgia. On some evenings they earned enough to cover petrol costs. On other evenings they barely made a profit. However, Alan continued to moving. His voice was distinctive, strong, sincere, and profound. People began to notice gradually. Dixie Steel became well known in the community. Scene. It was something, even if it wasn't famous. Alan had something else that got him through the difficult moments. Denise, in high school, they had met and fallen in love. They were married on December 15, 1979, when they were only 21 years old. They were impoverished, despite having a straightforward wedding. They had a close relationship. Denise had faith in Alan's dream despite its seeming impossibility. She was employed as a flight attendant to help them as Alan continued to pursue the music. There were difficult days. The bills were piling up. Their possessed fights. They weren't sure. However, they remained together. Early in the 1980s, Alan was continuing to play with Dixie Steel. The money was poor and the crowds were sparse, but he continued. He had previously experienced the type of life that was the subject of country music. Work, love, hardship, and hope. Alan Jackson and his wife Denise took a risk in 1985. They packed all of their belongings into one U-Haul trailer and departed Noonan, Georgia, with the intention of headed directly for Nashville. They were unemployed, unsupported by record labels, and almost no money. Alan had a big dream and a few tunes. That was it. It was extremely risky, yet they had faith in one another. In particular, Denise never ceased to trust Alan's music. Their Nashville apartment was tiny. Each bill seemed like a mountain. As a steward, Denise took more flights to keep them afloat. Their major break didn't come from cold calling or auditions, but Alan took any gigs he could. It originated with chance. One day Denise noticed Glenn Campbell on a regular flight. The majority of individuals would have been too timid to speak, but Denise approached him directly and informed him about Alan. She didn't for a chance ask for a record deal. Glenn did not dismiss her, rather he gave her the business card of his manager. Everything changed in that instant. They utilized that one card as justification for making the decision to relocate to Nashville. Hope only, no assurances. When they got there, Alan got his first job at the Nashville network in the mail office. He delivered parcels, sorted mail, and remained outside of the way, yet he never stopped studying and listening. That postal room turned into first-hand glimpse of the country music business. Alan spent his free time sitting in on You Can Be a Star tapings. He studied for the singing competition. Each performer on that stage he felt at home. His opportunity arrived in 1986. Who was simply enjoying his customary seat in the crowd when he was asked if he would like to perform. He took the stage and began to sing. George Jones Stopped Loving Her Today. Everyone in the crowd got up. Alan was no longer a nobody. Keith One of the producers there that evening, Stegel, began working with Alan because he was so amazed, and that would turn out to be among the most crucial collaborations throughout Alan's career. Alan soon signed his first songwriting contract deal with the music publishing company of Glenn Campbell. It wasn't ostentatious. He was earning a meager living by penning songs for other musicians. He worked for hours, writing daily, discovering what worked and what didn't. However, the road was rough. Alan and Denise lived paycheck to paycheck for years. Each record label rejected him. He didn't have the look, according to some. Some claimed that he sounded overly conventional. Denise persevered, putting in long hours at work while Alani put his all into his music. He heard and saw his friends being signed. He listened to their song on the radio and pondered whether his moment would ever arrive. In 1989, everything changed with a move made by Alan Jackson. June 26 saw him rise to the first performer to sign with Arista Nashville, a new division of the renowned Arista Records. When country music was changing and new artists like Jackson's name stood out as Garth Brooks and Clint Black entered the scene, Arista Tim Dubois, the president of Nashville, thought he was unique. Jackson possessed RO classic sound that was both new and recognizable. That signature, the initial, represented the start of anything significant on the label's books. The picture stands in Jackson's personal collection to this day. However, questions started to surface a few months later. In Blue-Blooded Woman, Jackson's debut single, was released in September 1989. It didn't go as to plan. On the Billboard country chart, the single only peaked at number 45. It was unable to break the top 40. Questions were raised by that kind of start. People questioned whether Jackson's old-fashioned approach was already outdated. Some people at Arista weren't even sure if they made a mistake with their first signing. Jackson didn't flinch though. The lackluster response only made him more determined. He would acknowledge years after that his fire was ignited by the song's failure. Perhaps the Blue-Blooded Woman wasn't at it, but it also brought in a persistent voice. Then the actual breakthrough, Jackson's second single, Here, was released on January 15, 1990. In the actual world, everything was different. Fans responded well to the song. It was about the harshness, beauty, and heartache of real life. It got to the reached number 1 in Canada after peaking at number 3 on the Billboard country chart. Jackson had discovered his audience. Critics abruptly stopped questioning and began to pay attention. Here, in reality, the world wasn't merely a success. It was a pivotal moment. From that point on, Jackson's professional life took off. It set off a streak in which he would land 27 consecutive top 10 singles. Consistency like that was practically unheard of. With Jackson demonstrated in a single song that country music didn't have to follow trends. All it had to do was be truthful. On February 27, 1990, the full-length debut album, Here in the Real, was released to the world. It did more than simply capitalize on the single's popularity. It remained on the charts for a year or more. 4 of its tracks made it into the top 5. In the actual world, I'd Love You Everywhere, Wanted, and Chasing That Neon Rainbow Once More. The final one was quite intimate. It was written by Jackson for his wife Denise to commemorate the 10th anniversary of their marriage. It reached the top ender and his first number 1 single. Remarkably, Jackson co-authored or penned 9 of the 10 tracks on the album. For a new performer, that degree of commitment is uncommon in the US. The album sold more than 2 million copies and brought in double platinum status. It was evident that Jackson's remarks, voice, and style had resonated deeply. Don't Rock the Jukebox was released by Alan Jackson. It rocked the genre. On May 14, 1991, the album released 4 tracks, consecutive singles. The title tune was played first, followed by Someday, and then and lastly, Love's Got a Hold on You, Dallas. At midnight, Montgomery, although it didn't top the charts, it did reach number 3 and remained there significantly longer in people's thoughts than the majority of chart-topping artists. The song was more than only a Hank Williams homage. Ghosts seemed to be present in the space. Jackson had been there. The grave of Williams in Montgomery, Alabama. He was affected by that encounter. You can sense the darkness and silence in every note of the song, which was recorded late at night. The actual album lasted just over 31 minutes. It didn't matter that it was brief. It was packed. George Jones even unexpectedly showed up to perform the last "Just Playing Parson" line, a reference to his moniker. Critics also praised it that it received an A from Entertainment Weekly, which at the time was almost unprecedented for a country album. When the dust, Alan Jackson wasn't only a rising star. He was settled. He was already in charge of the country neo-traditional movement. On October 6, 1992, a year later, Jackson published A Little About Love and A Lot About Living. If the previous album, The Jukebox, had been rocked, but this one blew it away. A song called Chattahoochee became more than just a hit. It developed into a full-fledged national anthem. Individuals, they lived it, not just liked it. Jackson Water, skis in the music video genes become deeply ingrained in the society. The CMA Song and Single of the Year awards went to it. 1994. It was a beast of an album. More than 6 million copies were sold. and it became Jackson's greatest achievement too. Date: 5 singles made it to the top 5. 2 proceeded directly. She's Got the Rhythm, I Got the Blues, and Chattahoochee are at the top. Jackson even collaborated with Randy Travis on 7 of the 10 tracks. Additionally, even the album's title was inspired by a Chattahoochee lyric that was the size of the tune. Then an opportunity arose that might have altered everything. Alan Jackson left the scene in 1994. The same group that had propelled him from obscurity to prominence was 1010 Management. He wasn't angry when he did it. He was adamant about it. He desired to maintain authority over his music, his message, on this picture. Instead, he signed with Gary Overton. Nashville was rocked by just one action dot at the height of their stardom. Most musicians wouldn't dare switch sides. Jackson, however, wasn't like most artists. He was unwilling to let the machine sculpt it. He wished to maintain integrity. The sector known as It's Dangerous. Jackson deemed it essential. On June 28th of that year, he published Myself. The gamble paid off in an instant. The album peaked at number 1 and number 5 on the Billboard 200 and in the country charts. During the first week, it sold more than 100,000 copies on its own. 4 of its tracks peaked at number 1: Summertime, I Don't Even Know Your Name, Living on Love, Gone Country, and Blues. By January, it was already 400 times platinum in 1999 in one edition. The record even had extra Chattahoochee remix for fans around the world. Jackson wasn't merely no longer a US star. He was going worldwide. It received a B in entertainment from the critics. Every week, complimenting the grounded production in Jackson's composed, sure of what. The liner notes for the album contain a who's who of musicians who lives in Nashville. Jackson, however, wasn't finished establishing his worth. Later in 1994, he demonstrated his range. He co-wrote the popular song If I Could by Clay Walker, earn a living alongside Roger Moura and Keith Stevens. The song was brief, snappy, and intelligent, lasting only 2 minutes and 14 seconds, but it went straight to the number 1. You could sense Jackson's influence in the lyrics. Even though he didn't sing on it, he was that incisive in his writing. Alan Jackson reached the pinnacle of his career in 1995. Profession. On October 24th, he published his Best Hits collection. Additionally, it wasn't your typical record. In country music, it was a significant event. The record featured 2 new songs, in addition to all of his greatest hits from his previous 4 albums: I'll Try, Tall Tall Trees, and Tracks. They both immediately rose to the top on the Hot Country Songs Billboard list. The album itself peaked at number 1 and number 5 on the Billboard 200 on the national chart. In the US alone, it sold more than 6 million copies, has obtained a platinum accreditation from 6AX. In the same year, Alan Jackson was awarded significant honors. Even the CMA Entertainer of the Year award went to him. It was a larger deal because there were changes in country music. Even though new sounds were emerging, Jackson continued to use the same approach and his admirers adored him for it. Then, he took a risk in 1999. He collaborated with Murder on Music Row as a song that George Strait will release. This wasn't merely any tune, it was a full-fledged assault on the evolution of country music. Though the lyrics claimed that authentic country music had been destroyed, the steel guitarist Enthi sung longer sobs. They were obviously upset about pop influences, assuming control. Additionally, the title was influenced by a true 1989 murder, when a Cashbox magazine employee was murdered on Nashville's Music Row. That offense was connected to a Poliola controversy. It was a poignant song. Artists, critics, and fans all argued, disputed. It was the topic of conversation. The crazy part comes next. It wasn't even radio stations played it, even though it wasn't an official single. A large number of them didn't on the Billboard Hot Country list. It peaked at number 38. That resulted in it was never released as a single, and was the highest charting album cut in the period of broadcast data systems. Gar Brooks was the only other song that had come close. Wood Below. The message of Strait and Jackson, however, was more loud. It demonstrated how traditional country music was missed by many people. In May 2000, Strait and Jackson, that same song, introduced the Academy of Country Music Awards. It was a brave action. Millions of people watched in real time. They had the option to play it safe, but instead they set the whole country music industry on fire. One of the most talked about moments in the history of the award event. The performance received extensive media coverage. It meant more than simply the music. Making a statement was the goal. Meanwhile, Jackson continued to put out albums that fans found insatiable. In 1996, Everything I Love was released. Then, in 1998, came High Mileage. It was a darker record. Jackson thereafter claimed that it revealed some personal difficulties. It did, however, have 4 major singles. Right on the Money, one of them, became the number 1 song. He published Under in 1999. The influence and homage to the myths that influenced him. Additionally, he released When Somebody Loves You, which reminded him of the old-fashioned tales. Every O'Neill'bum maintained his flair while adding something fresh. It was among the best times in his career. However, despite all of the success, there were when Alan and his wife Denise split up at the beginning of 1998. They had been 19 years of marriage. Supporters believed they had a solid bond. However, the reality is fame had cost him. Alan had a full schedule. The gap widened. Later on, Denise disclosed that Alan had cheated on her. That marked a sea change. Alan acknowledged feeling adrift. He remarked, "When we first started out, we were just kids. We were not given the opportunity to mature before making a commitment. The months-long separation, it hurt. Time for both of them. They eventually made their way back. It didn't occur all night. It required effort, trust, and counseling." Denise rested against her. She was able to forgive and heal because of her Christian convictions. She even penned a book regarding the encounter. It's all about him. Finding the Love of My Life was the title. Life New York Times bestseller status was achieved by the book. In it, Denise discussed difficulties of having a famous spouse, the hurt of betrayal, and how once more she discovered who she was. Readers were moved by her candor. Then arrived 9/11. Both the outside world and Alan too underwent changes. On the 28th of October in 2001, he awoke around 4 a.m. only 7 weeks after the attacks, with a tune in his head. He filmed it on a portable gadget while still half asleep so he wouldn't tire it. "Where Were You When the World Stopped Turning" became the title of the song. He composed it in a few hours. It was not political. It made no attempt to preach. It simply posed inquiries. At the moment, everyone had questions. Initially, he refused to record it. He was worried that the tragedy would be interpreted as a publicity stunt. However, his wife was urged to share it by Denise and producer Keith Stagel. In November, Alan Jackson sang the song live at the CMA Awards on July 7, 2001. He was scheduled to perform Where I Come From. Plans were abruptly altered. He spilled his heart out on a stool with a full orchestra behind him. The viewers gave him a standing ovation after standing in silence. It was among the CMA's most memorable performances. Radio stations began to play the live version right away. The traffic even caused his website to crash. The occasion seemed larger than music. It was therapeutic. The song quickly rose to the top of the charts when it was published, spent 5 weeks on the Billboard Hot Country Songs chart. Additionally, it came in at number 28 on the Billboard Hot 100 for all genres. That wasn't common for a ballad in the country. The song was included on his Drive album from 2002, which topped the Billboard 200 and the top country albums charts upon launch. More than 11,000 copies were sold in the first week. The album achieved 4 times platinum status by May 2003. Jackson was among them, both the song's live and radio renditions. It later won the award for Song of the Year. It gave Jackson his first Grammy in recognition at the ACM and CMA Awards. Alan, the 3 girls that Jackson and his wife Denise nurtured, became the center of his universe. The oldest, Maddie, was born on June 19, 1990. She wasn't merely a shadow of her father. She made her own way. Tragic events occurred after she married Samuel Seligman in 2017, heckled less than a year later in a boating accident. She continued somehow. She established the Nashville Foundation to aid victims of human trafficking, widows, and orphans. She then discovered love in 2023, once more, and gave birth to her first child in 2024. Ali, who was born in August, came next to 1993. In 2020, she wed Sam Bradshaw, and Alan became a grandfather in Jackson. Alvy Bradshaw was born to her in December 2022. She frequently says her father was the ideal father for any daughter. He was dependable, kind, and modest. The youngest, Danny's birthday is August 28, 1997. Although she doesn't make much of herself, her father's affection for her is evident in his songs. "You'll always be my baby," he wrote for the weddings of his daughters. The family of Alan Jackson was always interwoven with his songs, but his popularity enabled him to establish an equally significant existence outside of his enormous mansion in Franklin, Tennessee, sold for $28 million in 2010. Million Briar was a 135-acre estate that included a private lake, a 19,000-square-foot home with bedrooms. It was now a landmark in the area. However, Alan and Denise desired something more straightforward. They chose peace over flash, even though his name was at the top of the charts. In the same year, few country singers are ever honored like Alan was. On April 16, 2010, the 4,005th star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame was given to him. He was at 6801. Reminiscing about his days as a Georgia lad pursuing music on Hollywood Boulevard. He had sold more than 50 million albums by that point, won more than 100 accolades, and performed for 3 US presidents. However, he claimed that this particular occasion felt unique. In January 2011, a few months later, he stunned the business by calling off his collaboration with Arista in Nashville for 21 years. In 1989, he was their very first artist. They produced over a dozen platinum records and 35 chart-topping songs together. Documents. Alan, however, was prepared to assume command. In March of that year, he signed a contract with Capital EMI and established Alan's Country Records. He was altering the rules, not just the labels. While Capitol managed marketing, he maintained creative control. It was daring, uncommon, and effective. From 2012 to 2015, Alan published Ender, his new collaboration for new albums. First in line was 30 Miles West, 2012 when it first appeared, at the top of the Billboard Country chart. In 2013, he released more, including the gospel-filled Precious Memories Volume 2. On this initial foray into that genre with a bluegrass CD in 2015, he then published Fans Were Reminded that he still had that old-school country vibe by Angels and Alcohol. Spirit. Every record revealed a new aspect of him, and none of it was forced. Everything he did was according to his conditions. However, behind the scenes, Alan had he was diagnosed with Chattahoochee in 2011, the year he left Arista. Dental disease, a hereditary condition that gradually damages your muscles and nerves. His family had a history of it. His father had it. His sister and grandma also did. However, Alan said nothing. He continued to write music, perform live and prevailing. Even when the illness began to impair his mobility and balance, he didn't desire sympathy. He was not looking for attention. All he wanted to do was continue. The business gave him another honor in October 2017. Currently, with a spot in the Hall of Fame for country music, recovering from a stroke, Loretta Lynn and Britsomion to introduce him. It was an emotional moment. In 2018, a year later, he was admitted into the Songwriters Hall of Fame in Nashville. These weren't Maryliners, they were the last acknowledgement of a career that permanently altered the landscape of country music. At last, in September he went public in 2021. He revealed that he had CMT to the world on the Today Show. He stated it wasn't fatal, but it was becoming worse and was incurable. He didn't want his followers to believe that he was ill or intoxicated while performing. He desired the truth to be known. He promised to keep legends like Willie Nelson and Merle Haggard, who never truly retired, are examples of people who played as long as they could. In 2022, Alan Jackson made a choice that devastated millions of people. He declared that this would be his last tour, one more for the road, last call. Supporters were aware that it wasn't just another series of performances, it was farewell. Having performed in country music for over 40 years, Jackson was moving away. The rationale, however, was what really took everyone by surprise. Alan disclosed that Chattahoochee tooth disease, a rare nerve condition that gradually erodes muscle, was the cause of his diagnosis, equilibrium and control. He claimed that it was becoming more difficult to play and to stand. Instrument, and more difficult to play. However, rather than fading away in silence, he gave one final opportunity for his followers to join in on his songs. In June, the tour began. 22 and soon sold out in more than 30 cities. The tickets disappeared in Sahas to see him one last time. People traveled across states. For many, these weren't only performances, they were heartfelt farewells to their childhood voice. As Alan was speaking goodbye on stage, a new chapter was starting at home. He did so in December 22. Became a grandfather. Jackson Alvey is the newborn boy born to his daughter Allie. Social media was filled with heartwarming images of Alan holding his first grandson. When June 2024 rolled around, his daughter Wesley, Alan Smith, a boy, was born to Maddie. Alan had been available. About how he overcame his disease and now finds happiness in these small lives. He described how their laughing strengthened him and how it seemed more significant to play music and tell them stories, more so than before. Despite his physical limitations, being a grandfather made he felt alive once more. The end of it all was May 17, 2025. The last performance of the tour took place inside the crowded Fisher Forum in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. There were more than 17,000 supporters present. Singing every word, brandishing signs and dabbing at tears. The appearance of country music starts with visual tributes on screen. Jackson's relatives also sent messages. However, "The remember when" was the final note he sung, and it's a moment to remember. Waned. He made a goodbye address while standing by himself in the spotlight. His tone, he referred to his experience as a long, sweet ride and cracked. Audience applauded and stood. For over 10 minutes. The performance was broadcast on national television and streamed online. Television. As one of the most adored voices in country music left, millions of people watched the final time on stage.